The sound of a slammed passport echoed through the busy terminal like a gunshot. Travelers turned for a split second, then went back to their routines, no one realizing what had just happened at Gate 47. A young black woman stood frozen, her hands trembling as two airport staff sneered, holding her burned passport like a trophy. The scent of burnt paper filled the air, mixing with the hum of departure announcements. She had arrived early for her flight, calm, polite, dressed in elegance that spoke of quiet success. Yet to them, she was just another face that didn't belong in the first-class lounge. Cameras caught flashes of the scene, passengers whispered, and humiliation scorched deeper than the fire that destroyed her passport. But what no one knew, not even the smug manager watching from behind the counter, was that she owned the entire airline they worked for. The acrid smell of burnt paper still lingered in the air as she stood motionless, the charred remains of her passport scattered near her feet. Around her, murmurs spread, a ripple of curiosity, judgment, and indifference all at once. The two staff members who had destroyed it were already walking away, laughing under their breath, feeling untouchable behind their uniforms. She inhaled deeply, steadying the storm behind her composed face. Years of experience had taught her one thing: power speaks loudest when it stays silent long enough to be underestimated. Her name was Amara Lewis, a quiet force in the corporate world, though none of them knew it. The name printed on that burned passport wasn't just a traveler's. It was the name that appeared on contracts, corporate mergers, and aircraft ownership documents. But here, stripped of recognition, she let them treat her like they always assumed: invisible. The terminal lights shimmered above, reflecting off the glass walls as an announcement echoed, "Final boarding call for Flight 308. Her flight. The one she owned, staffed and scheduled under her own airline, Lumen Air, a company she had built from nothing after years of racial rejection and silent wars in boardrooms that never expected her to rise. A young janitor nearby hesitated, his eyes flicking between the burned passport and Amara's face. He wanted to speak, but fear chained him. She gave him a gentle nod, a silent assurance that everything was fine, before picking up her designer briefcase, still calm, still quiet. In her head, she could hear her father's voice, the one who'd told her long ago, "Never shout when you own the walls that echo." She walked to the service desk, her heels clicking like a slow countdown. The manager behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with a forced smile and superiority carved into every gesture, looked up. "Ma'am, without identification, you can't board this flight." Amara simply looked at her, long enough for the woman to feel a strange chill crawl up her spine. No anger, no argument. Just that calm, unreadable silence that hinted at something much bigger. And as she turned away, quietly dialing a number on her phone, the balance of power was about to shift, and none of them were ready for it. The phone rang only once before a deep, composed voice answered on the other end. Amara's tone didn't rise above a whisper, firm, calm, and deliberate. "Activate Internal Protocol 7, she said simply, before ending the call and slipping the phone back into her coat pocket. No emotion, no explanation. Just a quiet storm brewing behind that steady gaze. The manager behind the counter frowned, annoyed that the woman still hadn't left the terminal. "Ma'am, I've already told you. You'll need to—" she began, but her words trailed off as two uniformed airport security officers approached. For a moment, the staff smirked, thinking they had backup. But then one of the officers whispered something into his radio, glanced at Amara, and suddenly straightened his posture. Confusion spread across their faces. Amara turned her head slightly, watching as the terminal's background hum began to shift. Employees started receiving alerts on their tablets. Screens flickered. Boarding announcements paused mid-sentence. The digital display above the counter suddenly went black, and then rebooted, showing a new message. Lumen Air internal security override in effect. The entire terminal froze. Passengers looked around, whispering. The arrogant manager's "oh" voice cracked. What's happening? But Amara didn't answer. She simply took a slow step closer, her calm presence now commanding the space without a word. A few seconds later, a convoy of black-suited executives emerged from the VIP passageway. Their badges gleamed with the Lumen Air insignia. Leading them was Samuel Briggs, the company's chief operating officer, a tall man whose face carried the same composure as Amara's. The staff's fake confidence melted into panic as Briggs approached, scanning the scene. His voice was low but heavy with authority. Who burned her passport? The two employees stiffened, unsure whether to lie or run. The manager pointed weakly at one of them. It was just a misunderstanding, sir. She didn't have her documents and—" Briggs raised a hand, cutting her off. Then his eyes softened as he turned to Amara. "Miss Lewis, I'm so sorry. We weren't informed you'd be traveling through this terminal personally." The silence that followed was deafening. Every head turned, every jaw dropped. The name. Ms. Lewis hit them like thunder. The woman they had mocked, humiliated, and judged was the owner. Amara didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply adjusted her sleeve and replied evenly, "I wasn't here for recognition. I was here to see how my people are treated when I'm not watching." Her words cut deeper than any reprimand could. The two staff members began stumbling over apologies, voices trembling. The manager's face turned pale, her earlier arrogance dissolving into visible regret. But Amara didn't acknowledge them. She stepped forward and looked around the terminal, at the passengers who had witnessed everything and said nothing. "You see?" she said softly, her voice steady but cold. "This is what silence breeds." Briggs nodded to one of the executives, who handed him a document. Within seconds, termination letters were printed and signed on the spot. The staff who had burned the passport were escorted out, their badges revoked. The manager collapsed into a chair, realizing she had just destroyed her own career, not with hatred, but with ignorance. Amara then turned her attention to the young janitor who had watched everything unfold earlier. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Marcus," he replied, nervous. "Marcus," she said, "you'll report to the corporate office next week. You're being promoted to customer operations trainee." The terminal went silent again, but this time with, "Oh." Amara gave one last glance toward the large glass windows overlooking the runway. A plane, her plane, was waiting there, engines humming softly under the morning light. Without another word, she walked toward it, her heels echoing like justice in motion. Behind her, whispers erupted like waves, some out of guilt, some out of admiration, some out of disbelief. But Amara didn't look back, because this wasn't revenge. It was revelation. The same hands that had burned her passport had just exposed the fire still burning in people's hearts. And she knew. This moment would ignite something far beyond this terminal. The jet bridge hissed open with a hydraulic sigh as Amara stepped through, the hum of engines vibrating faintly beneath her heels. Sunlight poured through the oval windows, casting soft reflections on the polished cabin floor. The flight attendants at the door straightened instantly, their smiles genuine, but tinged with unease. They had all heard what happened downstairs. Amara's expression remained calm as she walked down the aisle toward her private suite at the front of the aircraft. Every step she took felt heavier, not with anger, but with the weight of every unseen injustice that had been endured by people like her for generations. She wasn't just walking toward a seat. She was walking through history. Through every moment her ancestors had been told they didn't belong. When she sat, she didn't close the door of her suite. Instead, She looked out the window toward the terminal below, where the same staff, who had humiliated her, were now being escorted away by airport security, their faces pale, eyes downcast, their arrogance gone, replaced by the hollow silence of realization. Her phone vibrated. A message from her communications director appeared on the screen. "Do you want this incident suppressed or made public?" For a long moment, Amara didn't reply. She could have erased it all. One call, one command, and no one would ever know what had happened. But that was the easy path, the same one countless CEOs had taken before her. And easy paths never changed anything. Instead, she typed back, "Release the footage, all of it, no edits." As the engines roared to life, she leaned back in her bay seat, closing her eyes. A low rumble filled the air as the plane began to taxi down the runway, its wings slicing through the morning light. In her mind, the scene replayed, the laughter, the burn, the silence of the crowd. And beneath it all, a single truth echoed. Power means nothing if it doesn't protect the powerless. Outside, the terminal grew smaller, fading into the distance. But on the airport's internal network, the leaked footage had already begun to spread, a grainy clip showing the cruel mockery, the burning passport, and the stunned realization that followed. Within minutes, it would be everywhere. Up in the sky, the clouds parted as the plane ascended. Amara opened her eyes, watching the sun pierce through. For the first time that morning, she allowed herself a small breath of peace, not satisfaction. Not revenge, but something purer, accountability. She had turned humiliation into history. And this time, the world would have no choice but to see. By the time Amara's plane touched down in New York, the world had already changed. Her phone was lighting up nonstop. News networks, social media, and corporate partners all exploding. With one story. Airline owner faces racism from her own staff. Clips from the terminal had gone viral. The image of her burned passport lay beside headlines demanding accountability, and millions of comments poured in under hashtags like "Flying While Black and Dieter Amara Lewis." But amid the outrage, something deeper began to happen. A collective reflection that pierced the world of silent observers who'd too often watched discrimination and said nothing. At the corporate headquarters of Lumen Air, board members sat in stunned silence as Amara entered the conference room. Cameras were already set up for the emergency press briefing. She took the podium without notes, her presence steady and unshaken. "When I started this airline," she began softly, "I wanted it to represent possibility, a space where anyone, no matter their color, could be treated with dignity in the skies. But yesterday reminded me, the problem isn't always the system, it's the people who hide behind it." Her words echoed across every screen. There was no anger, no dramatics, only the clarity of truth. "You can train for skill," she said, pausing, "but you cannot train for humanity. That must be chosen." Around the world, employees of other airlines began posting their own stories, moments when passengers had been profiled, denied, or humiliated. For the first time, corporate statements weren't enough. Policies were being rewritten overnight. Airports launched diversity reforms, customer service programs were reviewed, and Lumen Air announced a new initiative under her personal supervision, the Human First program, dedicated to unbiased hiring and fair travel experiences. A week later, the same terminal where her passport had been burned was renovated. The new plaque on the wall read, "Equality is the only passport." Amara visited quietly, no cameras, no press. The young janitor, Marcus, now wearing his new trainee badge, greeted her with a proud smile. For a moment she looked around. The bustling terminal, now filled with new faces, new energy, and new hope. As she prepared to leave, she paused near the large glass window overlooking the runway. Outside, one of her planes lifted off gracefully into the golden sky, its wings gleaming in sunlight, a reflection of progress rising above the smoke of ignorance. Amara smiled faintly and whispered to herself, "They burned a passport, but not the journey." Then she turned and walked away, calm, powerful, unshaken, leaving behind a legacy that would remind the world that sometimes the quietest storms bring the loudest change. And somewhere, in the endless hum of departures and arrivals, a single truth lingered. Racism may burn paper, but it can never ground those who know they were born to fly.